In 2025, a new arms race has emerged, one that could determine the fate of nations, economies, and even the safety of our entire planet. Countries across the globe are rushing to militarize space, transforming it into the next battleground. This is the terrifying reality of space wars. Stay with us as we uncover the alarming truth behind the militarization of space and why it should have all of us very, very concerned. Because we're about to reveal how the very satellites we rely on for everyday life could become targets in a global conflict. The militarization of space isn't new. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union tested anti-satellite weapons, marking the beginning of space as a potential battlefield. But today, it's not just two superpowers, it's the entire world. The creation of the US Space Force in 2019 was a game-changer, signaling to other nations that space was now a critical domain of military strategy. The response was swift. China, Russia, and even smaller nations have begun to bolster their own space capabilities. But what does that mean for us here on Earth? Space has become the ultimate high ground. Nations are deploying surveillance satellites, missile warning systems, and even offensive capabilities designed to disable enemy assets. This isn't science fiction. This is happening right now. And what makes it even scarier? Most of these activities are happening in the shadows, beyond public scrutiny. Think about it. The same satellites that control your GPS, enable your communications, and guide airplanes safely across the sky could be obliterated in an instant. A single missile fired from Earth or another satellite could trigger a cascade of destruction, leading to what experts call the Kessler syndrome, a chain reaction of space debris that could make space unusable for generations. The United States, China, and Russia are the main players, each with their own ambitions and capabilities. The US has invested billions in its Space Force, focusing on defending assets and maintaining dominance. China, on the other hand, has demonstrated anti-satellite capabilities and is rapidly building a space infrastructure that could rival America's. And then there's Russia, testing its satellite killer weapons, ready to disrupt Western communication networks at a moment's notice. China's anti-satellite missile test in 2007 shocked the world, creating thousands of pieces of debris and proving that they could destroy critical assets in orbit. Russia has been developing nesting doll satellites that contain smaller, more agile spacecraft capable of approaching and disabling enemy satellites. These developments paint a chilling picture of what future conflicts might look like. And it's not just the major powers. Smaller nations like India are getting involved too. In 2019, India successfully tested its own anti-satellite missile, making it clear that space is no longer reserved for the giants. The dominoes are falling, and more countries are joining the race. But at what cost? The militarization of space poses existential threats, not just to the nations involved, but to all of humanity. Imagine waking up one day to find that there is no internet, no GPS, no communication networks. Military conflict in space could cripple our modern way of life. The satellites that power our banking systems, control power grids, and support emergency services are vulnerable. A war in space wouldn't just be fought with missiles and lasers, it would be fought through the complete disruption of everything we rely on, from navigation to weather forecasts, from emergency communication to streaming your favorite show. Satellites are at the core of modern life. And yet, these very satellites are now military targets. A successful attack on these systems could plunge entire nations into chaos. No internet, no phone calls, no way to navigate or even know what's happening around the world. We would be thrust into darkness. And it's not just anti-satellite missiles. Space-based lasers, jamming systems, and cyber weapons are all part of the new arsenal. These weapons can disable satellites, disrupt communications, and even destroy targets without a trace. The terrifying thing, there's no international treaty that effectively governs these actions. It's the Wild West out there, with nations doing whatever they think they can get away with. If the militarization of space continues unchecked, the consequences will be dire. Nations are investing heavily in offensive capabilities, and space is becoming a crowded, contested battleground. The potential for miscalculation is enormous. One mistake, one misunderstanding, and we could be looking at a conflict that extends beyond Earth's atmosphere, with devastating consequences below. Dr. Laura Grego, a senior scientist in the Global Security Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists, has extensively researched the risks associated with the weaponization of space. Dr. Grego explains,
The deployment of weapons in space could lead to a destabilizing arms race, increasing the likelihood of conflict and threatening the very infrastructure that modern society depends upon.
Dr. Brian Whedon, Director of Program Planning for the Secure World Foundation and former U.S. Air Force officer, has been vocal about the consequences of anti-satellite weapons. Dr. Whedon warns,
Anti-satellite weapons testing creates long-lasting debris that endangers all space activities, posing a significant risk to both military and civilian satellites.
we need to act now. The world's governments need to come together to create binding agreements that prevent the weaponization of space. Without regulation, space could become a war zone, one that none of us can escape from. The idea of space wars isn't just a far-off sci-fi fantasy. It's a very real, very imminent threat.